from the Mercy One studio.
Welcome, folks, to The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
We are coming to you live from these United States of America. I'm here in Des Moines, Iowa, where we are enjoying frosty weather. I know this is the case because one of our guests, who's going to be in the second half of the show, Dave Delio, is from New Orleans, and he keeps reminding me about every 15 minutes that he feels like the cold will kill him. But it's wonderful to be here. I myself enjoy the winter wonderland, but you're here in Des Moines, where I'm the Director of Mission and Ministry at Mercy College of Health Sciences and the Executive Vice President of the Newman Idea. You can find us at mchs.edu and newmanidea.org. Bud, what do you do out in the great land of Pennsylvania, and how is your winter going?
It just got cold last night. A cold front moved through, so I'm enjoying these more rigorous temperatures this morning. But I'm out here in Pittsburgh, director of the National Institute for Newman Studies. You can find all about our work at newmanstudies.org.
So, Bud, you know, you're saying this so that you kind of feel like you're invigorated by winter. Out at NINS, you know, does it get magical? Do you feel like you're in a snow globe when it hits that right point in of December, or is everybody just cold and miserable? How's that work out there?
Well, it's funny, when we moved out here, for some reason I picture in my mind Pittsburgh being one of these northern cities in the States, sort of similar to Buffalo or something like that. But really, I don't know, I think we're right under the point where it gets crazy cold and crazy snowy. So like Erie, Pennsylvania, which is really just a 2-hour drive from here, they'll get these, like, you know, the 45-inch snow one weekend.
Wow.
And we're spared that. So here, if it snows, it's actually usually pretty beautiful. And thank goodness, because some of the streets here are just ridiculous. I think we've got the steepest, Rialto Avenue is the steepest paved road in the country. So it would get pretty hairy if we had the kind of snowfall that Erie got.
Well, no, that makes sense. We're always, as always, we're underwritten by Mercy College of Health Sciences, and you know, they're wrapping up the year. I think that this semester, and I think this is when finals week is. And yeah, you know, you see that sort of dual nature on the face of students, where they're happy that they're getting ready to go on break, but also they have information leaking out of their ears as they try to stuff it for the different finals that they have. How's your classes wrapping up at Mercy College of Health Sciences, Bud?
So, to be quite honest, I've had bang-up students this semester. That's a good term, right? Bang-up?
Yes, that's the technical term, right?
You know, as a professor, I don't know, but we probably shouldn't say on air, but we do have in mind a certain batting average. There are some tadpoles that get left behind,
right,
because of different circumstances. But really, in both of my classes, I like 90+% of the students have not only turned everything in, but done really like quality work. So I don't know what kind of recruiting you're doing there in Iowa, but it's quite impressive.
Right. Me personally saying, like, do you want to take this class with a Mr. Bud Marr and really hit it out of the park? Well, I try to do what I can, but I'm looking out for you, even when we're a time zone away.
Yeah, thanks so much, sir. Maybe it's just like me leaving the state, and all of a sudden the academic thing just, went through the roof. So.
Nice. Well, today on the show, speaking of the academic prowess, we have two heavy hitters. We're going to have one person on each segment. The first one, returning to the show, is Leroy Husengay, who Bud and I have known in grad school, but then also all of the wonderful things that he's been doing since at University of Mary. Last time we talked to him, he had a book on Mark, and now he has a new book out about Matthew, Behold the Christ, Proclaiming the Gospel of Matthew. So we're going to talk about his new book. And then the second half of the show, another Uncommon Good All-Star, our mutual friend Dave Delio, who's going to come on the show. And people might have noticed that I didn't talk about the Zeta Institute. At the top of the show, I talked about the Newman Idea. We're kind of joining forces, and we'll take that second part of the show to kind of tell what that's about. But it's nice to be able to use the airwaves to keep in contact with old friends that have wonderful things going on.
Yeah, I'm really excited to discuss Leroy's book, Behold the Christ. This time of year, with us waiting for the coming of Christ, my mind turns to the Gospels a lot, and I just think Leroy is one of the best expositors of gospel theology that the Catholic Biblical Studies world has right now. And of course, Dave Delio. Yeah, it'll be great.
Yeah, I like that we don't even try to do too much more. We just say, of course, Dave Delio.
Of course, Dave Delio.
So, but the other thing, that we have to come to the realization of is it's around Christmas time, so everybody's blasting all sorts of variations of Christmas music, even though it's Advent. Are you the type of person who then tries to drown out those songs by loudly singing "Come, O Come, Emmanuel" and other Advent hymns as loud as possible, or what's your strategy with the kiddos on that one?
By way of confession, I do like to be sort of a grumpy Catholic, and kind of a curmudgeon. But when it comes to the holidays, I do cheat a little bit. We try to create an Advent ethos at the house, but I can't help but sneak in a few Christmas carols and movies before the festivities officially commence.
Right, on our end, the homeschooling choir in Des Moines, of course, is fantastic. You had daughters in it, Stella, my daughter's in it. And so they kind of have to have it before Christmas. It wouldn't work otherwise. And literally some angelic singing of Christmas songs in Advent, but to prepare us. And so, yeah, I think that some things are worth scooching up a little bit if that means that we get to have those things go on. Well, this is the Uncommon Good. For Bud Marr, this is Bo Bonner. Stick around because we'll be back right after this. We're back with the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr coming to you live on this Wednesday. We're trying to reach our host. We're having a bit of communication difficulties. But Bud, while we're waiting to see what we can do to get in touch with Leroy, when it comes to, like you were saying, the Advent season and really paying attention to the Gospels, a lot of times people think of, we only have these few verses that talk about Jesus' childhood that really have anything to do with Advent. But there's a way in which the Advent cycle is the best time to consider the Gospels in a whole, especially since we're waiting for the coming of Christ again. Do you mind talking about that or telling us what you meant by that? Because I think that's a really good thing to keep in mind during this Advent season.
Well, our guest on last week's show was Mike Aquilina, and he's written this book about the prophecy of Malachi, of the prophecy of a time where a perfect sacrifice would be offered from east to west, and connected this to, of course, the celebration of the Mass around the world. But as Catholics, there is this stereotype out there. I think even the comedian Jim Gaffigan has made light of it, that Catholics don't know their Bible as well. Of course, recent Catholic writers have really pressed the Mass in and of itself is just bathed in Scripture. I think Advent's a great time of the year to dig into the Old Testament deeply and to start to see the connections between Old and New. So, of course, the prophecies from Malachi, the prophecies from Isaiah. There's been some really interesting work on Jesus being a second Moses or even Joshua who initiates this new Exodus. And so all of those resonances are there. But I think it's one part of reading sacred Scripture where you have to do a little spade work. But after saying that, there's so many just great resources available online these days that it's right at our fingertips.
Yeah, I think that when we talk about what we're waiting on, it's easy for Advent to end up being just, Advent's when you buy stuff and make cookies, and that's all we really have in mind that it ends up happening. But the idea of preparing, of course, for something that's happening in the future as monumental, of course, as the coming of Christ and the second coming and the fulfillment of his kingdom, there's really no bridge too far about prepping. And you see this with the readings where we actually hear a lot about John the Baptist, or we hear a lot about the future that we're looking forward to. And so I know that Christmas really is where we get to dwell on those infancy narratives and things like this, and about what does it mean for Christ to become incarnate. So it's sometimes important for us beforehand to think about the end times, actually. The sort of typical idea about Advent season is, Christ comes in history and mystery, and then I always blank on the last one, but the idea is, Christ came in history, and so we're going to, in this time, wait with those people, right? The Old Testament, but even Mary herself. And then he comes mysteriously in the Eucharist, and that way as well. And then finally, he's going to come at the end of time and justify all things. So it makes sense for us to do that prep work and be mindful about what it means to truly wait for Jesus to come.
Yeah, I was speaking at Dom Garanger's liturgical year about Advent, and he speaks about these three comings, that Christ came the first time in meekness as a lowly infant, and now he comes, like you said, in mystery, and he says in spirit and in power, and then at the end of time in majesty. And there's a real urgency of being prepared for Christ's second coming, because in the second coming, I don't know how to say it well, but it will be of a different sort than his first coming, where things will be sorted out and the justice that he's initiated will be fulfilled completely in all aspects of human life.
Right.
But one thing that's amazing about the Catholic liturgy, and I think this goes back to the Old Testament as well, when the Israelites would celebrate these great festivals, it wasn't simply a memory, but it was almost like a reenactment or representation. So Moses would say directly to the people wandering in the wilderness, like, you have seen God do these things in your midst, even though that generation hadn't necessarily been a part of the actual Exodus. And so I love this time of year because I don't want to say literally, but we sacramentally experience the same waiting that the people of God did as they prepared for the coming of the Messiah the first time around.
No, the idea about how time works and how it works differently than we're all used to, that God really does surprise the way that we're going to understand all these things. Advent is one of those seasons that I think really allows us to begin to understand why it is so important for us to do a little bit of digging into our faith, to ask what that means, because it can sound like a little bit too mystical, or maybe we don't give it enough teeth to make this understand, but people really do understand that time feels different. We understand that there's a way that the world seems different between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Even secular people celebrating it in a secular holiday will talk about this time of year, right? It's not out of the realm of human experience to talk about the way in which we experience time in these different ways. So when we start to talk about that the Advent season is a way in which the past, the present, and the future start to unfold in on each other, and the mysterious way that happens, it really isn't a huge jump. People already feel this way. This is why the holidays can be lonely for some people who are maybe missing past members of the family that have passed away, or jubilant or expectant, right? There's plenty of parents that are getting ready, for instance, for their college kids to come home that they haven't seen for a while. We do this naturally, and then the church just takes it and, so to speak, puts it into fifth gear. We're not only talking about waiting for the future for people we haven't seen to arrive. Now we're waiting for the Messiah to come, that we know he's in our midst. We feel him in our midst. We live a different life because he's in our midst. However, he's coming soon in a sort of completely different way, and that is what this season is all about.
Yeah, but one thing that constantly amazes me about the way that providence works is when you think about how God has revealed himself to us, and you think about all the different, like the spectrum of personalities with human beings, God is not simply a monolithic, like there's a way that God is all powerful. There's a way that God is all loving. But God, it just feels like the way that salvation history has been arranged, he meets all sorts of different personalities where there are, and all different facets of human life. So in the incarnation, the Messiah came to us as a babe in Bethlehem, unwelcomed, But we experience the majesty of God in different ways. And with this conversation about the sort of like the different arrivals or the different advents that we experience, I just kind of stand in awe that we know God through the sacraments, we know God through sacred scripture, we know God through private prayer. And so there's the very like spiritual aspects, there's the way that God reveals himself through beauty and in power, and then of course still each Mass is kind of an extension of the Incarnation, because the infinite God comes to us under the appearances of bread and wine. It's all cause for meditation this time of year, especially.
Well, I think that the interesting thing to throw out too is, on one hand, I kind of understand why people might want to rush towards Christmas, right? Because we're excited about the coming Savior. But there's also a way in which, if we don't have the sort of patience to enjoy Advent, we might suffer encountering Christ as a quick fix, right? So like, oh, you know how it's nice to get a present and that sort of dopamine hit of feeling like, oh, I have something new and it's neat and shiny and someone cares about me and all those wonderful feelings. But if we, reduce Christ to, that sort of like getting something as soon as we can, and that makes us feel better. Advent really teaches us not delayed gratification like you're trying to teach, your 5-year-old, in a sort of small way, but that the spiritual goods in life demand a sort of patience. And you think about the patiently waiting that the patriarchs of Israel had been waiting for the day of the coming of the Messiah. And, you see this in sort of, the prophetess Anna or Zechariah, that, we were waiting for this day, and we waited to old age. We put this off, and all of these people who foretold the Messiah patiently waited. And the Advent, that's what we're trying to do, is teach this patient waiting. And I think about trying to do things for kids, whether it's, Advent trees or whatever it might be, in a society and in a world where, people want to have as many Christmas parties as they can between Thanksgiving and actual Christmas. That's a little bit of the hard work that we just have to be willing to do, to talk about the benefit of expectant waiting, that it's not that, waiting isn't just, bad and negative. There's something to be gained through that waiting.
Yeah, if I could put you on the spot a bit, because I always like hearing your harebrained theories, and especially recording them on air for posterity's sake.
Nice.
But this is not an original thought, but of course our culture has kind of inverted the celebration of this holy day, where the hustle and the bustle and the celebration is really reserved for before Christmas. Do you have any conjecture as to why that got flipped in American culture?
Well, I mean, I think part of it is, the most cynical read, of course, is that if you have people able to shop for things for like a month and a half, and really put the impetus on getting stuff in, the more materialistic way, and it doesn't have to be, just horribly, maleficent, that they were like, oh, we're going to ruin Christmas this way. It doesn't have to be like, the trap door in which people use to ruin Christmas. But there really is a way in which, because we're not very patient, and because we have so much, we have so many things that we can get at the immediately at the tip of our fingertips, bud. And the longer we go in the sort of technological revolution of our society, you can wait less and less. Everybody's making jokes this year about how Santa Claus is going to become real because it's going to be an Amazon drone, right, who flies down your chimney and like leaves gifts. And so if the idea is becoming that, you can instantly gratify whatever it is you want, the idea that you would, get a toy or like, wait to find the right gift for someone and put it under the tree and have that expectant waiting, if that flies out the window, I really do think people stop thinking of expectant waiting as good in any way. And so the idea is like, let's just actually kind of have a low-grade party for like a month and a half. So, I don't know.
Yeah, it does seem to take a little extra intentionality, being where we are historically and socially, to really enter into Advent. And I was joking at a class that I was teaching recently that I run the risk in my neighborhood of being the fuddy-dud in the neighborhood. But it's really, we try to keep things a little bit low-key during the lead-up to it, when really I would argue like the 2 weeks directly before Christmas, like at a popular level, are probably filled with more parties than any other time of the year.
Right, and that seems to be the idea. Is like if like how you celebrate Christmas is like the just the being burnt out after all that stuff. It starts to be that we invert these things, but it's another weird one too. But is of course like we all have a lot of connections like where we work or like at our office parties and things like this. And so I think sometimes people want to like be able to celebrate like with their office mates, and it's like impossible to imagine that you would maybe meet outside of work to actually meet work people. So I think it's a confluence of a lot of weird things, and no one has to be doing it on purpose. You know what I mean? It can just kind of be crazy how that all ends up working out.
Yeah, so we can't just like blame the Protestants on this occasion, or
no, I mean, like I think that we ourselves like participate too much into it to blame anyone. So yeah, I think that's where that's at. So
I know you did a big Saint Nick thing. Do you have any other traditions at home, specifically Advent related?
We've the biggest problem with like the Advent tree this year is we have lost our tree. So that one hasn't helped us out. But we do the Advent wreath, and we make sure to do Advent prayers. And then one of the things our family does is we will sing the Marian prayer after the office. Like the Salve Regina during most of the year. But the Ave Maris Stella is the hymn for the Marian hymn for the Advent season. And so that's what we've been singing. So just even the small, change of songs to Mary at the end of night prayers, that demarcates a lot for our family. And I'm glad that, we learned that from the monks, and that starts to be, a way that even small changes like that signal to the kids how much things have changed.
I'm such a lightweight when it comes to the practice of the faith sometimes, but right when the violet vestments get broken out, it's just a huge thing for me. I'm like, it's green, green, green. And just to have that different shade of liturgical celebration, for whatever reason, that marking of time is like a big deal in my mental space.
I think marking time is the best way to put that. If we're willing to mark time to show our kids that things are different and special, and that we have, that we intend for time to be used not only just to get work done or to make money or to get schoolwork done, but that something actually begins to happen. We do this in all sorts of ways. We're willing to do this when it comes to like practicing piano or getting better at a sport. Why wouldn't we do the same with the coming of Jesus Christ?
Yeah, and I was joking a few minutes ago about blaming the Protestants. I didn't really mean that. But one thing I do love about this time of year is that I think the power of the Catholic faith really almost overwhelms our culture. And just walking through our neighborhoods and seeing some of the beautiful creches and things that are on display in people's front yards, it's almost like even those maybe outside the orbit of the church, they can't resist the power of this season. And so you start to see nativity scenes in different places. Even some of the theology that shows up on the airwaves is pretty amazing. And then, of course, the name of the holiday itself, Christmas, Christmas, it's really, even for, I think, the most hardened, maybe atheist or secularist out there, it's kind of hard to resist the draw of, I kind of told Rachel, and I don't generally like speaking in this way, but I think it's really true, like, if the story of Christ's coming was untrue, obviously it's not. It's almost like we'd have to invent something like this, because there's something that just really resonates with human nature, and sort of like the desires we have, not only to transcend the confines of this life alone, but also to know that there's a God out there who not only loves us, but has reached out in extraordinary ways to know us. And then, of course, the manger always lies under the shadow of the cross. So it's, there's all sorts of poignant things built into the Gospels and into the celebration of the liturgy that remind us that Christ came ultimately to shed his blood on behalf of the sins of the whole world.
Well, I think that, that's just the best way to think about this is, it's nice and cold outside. Maybe you have the fire going. Maybe you have a fake fire going. You at least have a heater or a furnace. But I know people like snuggling up and maybe to a good book. There's still books out there. You don't have to watch TV. But the idea being that if you can take just a little bit more time to be patient with the Gospels, and like I said, we've had a snafu with the guest we intended with Leroy Huizengay, but to suffice it to say, with his book, the idea is the Gospels themselves are a perfect example of something that if we can take the time to know a bit more about where the story's going, where it's headed, and all of these things, that we'd be able to appreciate, hopefully, the magnitude of what it means to celebrate God in the flesh being born on December 25th.
Yeah, and that's where I guess I'd give one more plug to our listeners about just immersing yourself in the Old Testament. And it doesn't mean all of us have to be biblical scholars, but I think the writers of the New Testament, they're kind of like a good professor. They expect they set a high bar because they know we're up for it and that's what's best for us. And so as much as possible, as we can begin to internalize the entire scope of Scripture, there are all sorts of cool ways, and hopefully we can have Leroy on the show in the very near future here, where the biblical authors are hearkening back to, like, we had a professor in div school, who said echoes of Scripture in the writings of Paul. And so even like a story like the binding of Isaac, when you first encounter that in the Old Testament, where God calls Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, on one level we're like, well, this is kind of strange that it shows up in sacred writ. But then in the Gospels we see how that was setting the stage for the significance of Jesus Christ.
And if people want maybe a heads up about where to start, Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, very signally important for the church in Advent. So maybe that's a place to start, is to read the prophecy of Isaiah and the Gospel of Matthew. Well, folks, we're going to go to a break. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr will join you in the next segment with our buddy Dave Delio. This is The Uncommon Good. Stick around. We will be back right after these messages. Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr coming to you this Wednesday. And then we want to shout out to Leroy and say sorry for some of the confusion, the technical stuff on our end. We'll get you rescheduled, and we'll be able to talk about his fantastic book. Who we have with us for the second half of the show, another Iowa Catholic Radio All-Star who's been on multiple times, friend of both Bud and I, president of the Newman Idea, Mr. Dave Delio. Dave, how are you doing?
Doing well and glad to be back. It's been too long. And I just want to give a double shout out back to you as the new executive vice president of the Newman Idea, and hopefully we can talk about that. And Bud is our secret advisor who actually tells us how to do what we're supposed to do.
No, Bud, actually what you are is the grand, and I have to say this, like, Bud has always told me that what he loves doing is mishmashing his different groups of friends together to make a big, mix up, like, super 90s rap tape of, like, all of his friends becoming friends. And so, Bud, I never would have met Dave if it wasn't for you. And so if you ever see what Dave and I are up to or hearing us on the radio and you don't like it, remember that this is all your fault.
Well, I have to say I was really thrilled, like a tingle went up my leg when Dave mentioned a special title for me. I think when Adam Story was working for the diocese, or is working for the diocese.
I was like, wait, what happened? Go ahead.
We joked about the various titles that he had, Lord Chancellor and things like that.
Right.
So if you guys could come up with the most pretentious sounding fake designation for me, I'd deeply appreciate it.
I think we can get that to work, man.
Oh, yeah, that one's going to take a little thought, though. I mean, because, like, super secret advisor is kind of a fun one-off. But we got to put some time into this one. Right.
It will be horribly long, multiple words, hard to pronounce.
But you have to dress up, Bud, for the photo shoot for the website, something regal. It's going to involve, like, some type of cathedral, that you have to sit in with, like, crowns and a scepter or something.
at this year's Newman Association, can we plan some sort of secret ritual where I'm decked out in regalia and just carrying a mace?
No. We're going to go one further. We're going to have bearers that are going to carry you in on the cathedra. So we got to do it all in. This is how Newman would want it.
Hey, actually, the thing that I actually want to talk about, so we'll actually talk about the Newman Idea, but of course, people that, when we have two like Newman guys of y'all's stature on the radio, we got to talk about it a bit. I know we've talked about the fact that Bud was in Rome for the canonization of Newman, but so was Dave over here. Guys, how do you think Rome was able to take having both of you in town at the same time?
Well, there was also the Amazonian Synod, which was also
you guys were all there at the same time.
Yeah, I was there with another colleague who's joined the Newman Idea, Josh Brumfield, and every time we'd walk by, he's like, "Should we go in and crash it?" And just like go in and shout things about like Newman or something. Like Newman was in the Amazon at one point in time too. But first of all, the weather was amazing.
Dave is still complaining about how cold it is here, Bud. By the way.
But I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you guys have talked about it. It was a very special event, top to tail. And the Mass was just the real highlight. But seeing everybody, wasn't that awesome? Just like even the lectures that we saw at the Angelicum, and you had, hundreds and hundreds of people who were interested in Newman from around the world. And it kind of, you're like, this guy has been dead for 130 years. And yet generation after generation is rejuvenating, following his thought and his life and his witness.
That's right. And I think I said this to Bo on air a few weeks ago. I'm biased, but I really think with Newman, we can learn something from all of the saints. And as you get into the details of their lives, there's so much richness there. But there are some particular saints, figures like Mother Teresa and St. Teresa of Lisieux, and I would now include Newman in that boat, who I think have a really strong, almost universal appeal. And it's, Newman's another fascinating case because he's sort of this shy cleric who spends most of his life in a pretty small living space, writing letters and things like that. But there was something about his spirituality, his approach to the faith. Like he combined a strong commitment to the foundational teachings of the church with this kind of openness and engaging people from all sorts of backgrounds. And I totally concur with you, Dave. You could really see it on display in Rome, the sort of universal appeal, international, different religious orders and things that Newman has.
And it's not like everybody there was like a nerdy academic. There were orthodontists and people from all walks of life that somehow Newman reached down and touched something that was important. And so that's also what I thought was really fascinating is he's not just an intellectual saint. I think the further on things go from this lodestar of his canonization, I just think your everyday folk is going to find something in his spirituality and his witness they're going to be able to take home with them.
And I think, Bud, you've seen this already. I mean, we'll turn to what Dave and I are up to in that regard. But this year, man, you're a hot commodity. You're like the go-to guy. You follow people who follow you on Facebook and Twitter. You've been all over getting a chance to really talk about this.
Yeah, and people are usually pretty disappointed when I actually show up to the door. There's high demand for Newman talks right now, and like we're saying, from college student groups to parishes to more academic circles. I don't know, Dave, if this has come up in your conversations, but when I was across the pond, one thing that we really enjoyed is the two confirmed miracles for Newman's canonization, beatification, were from Americans. One was Deacon Jack Russell, and the other, a mother from Chicago who's facing a crisis, a very dangerous pregnancy. So we were kind of needling the Brits and saying, like, what, you guys don't pray over there?
Which they would probably readily admit, oh, no, we don't.
You guys are alienating all of our British listeners, so, thanks for that.
Right.
There goes our London
Well, we won the revolution, so we get Newman.
That was what it was actually fought over.
That's what it was over.
Yeah, that's great. Well, speaking of American initiatives with Newman, so the Newman Idea, and like I said, I've recently been named the executive vice president. Dave, you're the founder and the president, so the Newman Idea, what are we up to, and how does this have to do not only with Newman, but exactly what you said about taking an initiative of what John Henry Newman is about, but making this where it's not just for the academics.
Right, and I think that's where he really inspired me. I mean, I did my doctorate on him under Father John Ford, which was such a blessing at Catholic University. But along the way, I just became fascinated with, not only was he a thinker, and as you were saying, but, kind of this, he had this melancholic, almost reclusive side to him. And yet when you look at what he did, he was a builder. He was a unifier, an organizer, from the Oxford movement to trying to launch the Catholic University in Ireland to forming an oratory school. And I realized that Newman was as much a doer, even though it kind of went against his own natural inclinations. There was just something about him that was compelled to do things for the witness of the gospel. And I'd been in academia for a decade, and I decided to step out of it and to try to do something. And Newman was really an inspiration. So, I mean, we're still kind of doing stuff in academia. The mission of the Newman Idea is to keep college kids Catholic. And the way we're doing it is teaching accredited courses so that they can connect their faith with the things that they're learning in the university, whether they be in biomed engineering or in nursing or in business.
But at secular universities.
That's right. And so the other thing is we're taking it out of kind of the Catholic realm of universities, because really less than 10 to less than 10% go to Catholic universities in our country.
Yeah.
Of Catholics. 4 million Catholic students are at the big, state universities and other places like that. And we realize who's going there to, maybe they have great campus ministry, maybe they have focus, but they don't have someone there to say, here's how your faith works in your mind and in your spirit, and here's how it connects to the courses you're taking, your major, your degree track. And I think they need that. I needed that. I didn't go to a Catholic university, and I wasn't really interested in campus ministry. That, like the praying and the service, wasn't my thing. But if someone had come to me and said, what does it mean that you have a soul? And then how does that connect to all the other things that you like? I was a history major. I think like making the philosophical and the historical work, I would have been all in on that. And then I would have found my way a lot faster kind of into the deeper part of my faith, which it took me wandering around in my 20s to really kind of get that done. And I think if someone had been there to intervene, and I consider myself one of the lucky ones. I know a lot of my friends walked away from the faith and have never gone back.
Yeah, Bud, and when we've talked about this as converts and the way that Newman speaks in particular ways, I think that starts to be a common theme that if you're the type of student who is wondering, right, like both, with the O and the A, wandering around wondering, that Newman has a special appeal to folks in this day and age that maybe the confines of how the intellectual life or even the professional life is thrown out at us, that we want there to be something more. And John Henry Newman and the way that you've done work, Bud, and talked about it is especially attuned to make these connections for young people in their college age.
Yeah, one thing that's really impressed me with the initiative and the way you guys are shaping this thing is that there's a lot of scholars who write on Newman's idea of a university, so there's been a lot of ink spilled about this subject. But I feel like there's been a lack of putting it into practice. And I know there are Catholic schools that are doing their best to read Newman and to say, like, what can we glean from his ideas? But one thing I love about this initiative is it's boots on the ground in the best sense of the word. And so it's no longer like simply reflecting on what Newman's ideas mean for us, but trying to put them into practice. And when I visited England recently, I think even as an experienced Newman scholar, I was really struck. So we went out to Littlemore, where Newman lived in between leaving Oxford and joining the Catholic Church. And he restrung his violin so that he could teach the children in this very poor town music. He had like a community garden. And some of the administrative and brass tacks type things were actually not super enjoyable for Newman. He's upfront in his letters, like, I wish I had more time to write. But he was always about making these things concrete and incarnational. And I really feel like the Newman Idea is living out that legacy.
No, I think, yeah. I mean, I think those things, it's funny, you read it and frankly, I mean, but I'm glad you're doing the work that you're doing because, his intellectual and scholarly legacy has to walk arm in arm. But frankly, I mean, I'll be honest, I got a little bit tired sometimes of like, we've dissected his educational philosophy literally down to the letter, but what are we going to do about it? And we can't just keep doing book studies on it. We have to do something. And I think even if the task was to fail, I think it's worthy of the gospel, it's worthy of Christ, and it'd be worthy of Newman. He didn't always succeed, but I think in this way, what we're doing is we're taking our time and seeing how it's going to work. The neat thing is we're in Louisiana and we're starting the mission here in Des Moines, and I think that's going to open us up to a much wider world. But we're taking our time and kind of letting the Spirit and also this saint kind of walk us piece by piece and not be in such a hectic. We want to do it right. And I think that's something that Newman would appreciate too, because there are times when he rushed into things or got pushed into things that he wished he could have done over.
Yeah, and I think that for folks that are hearing this, that might be, I don't know, it's not like a hurdle necessarily, but it's important to point out to people that when you talk about saints, in the United States, I'd say that a big temptation is to think about them as either like action figures or celebrities or sort of people that don't actually touch our lives very much. And so to get the opportunity, Bud to be at an institute named after Newman, for us trying to like bring this to the people, when you start walking, when you start getting active, when you start trying to live out what they all said, I have to say it's an invigorating experience because I do think you feel the saints acting with you. And, maybe part of the problem, this goes back to our buddy John Leonetti with what he does with Sanctify You, is a lot of the times we make saints figures stuck in amber. But if we think that they're living, I think they want us to live out, to get active, to walk that walk with them. And I know that was part of the appeal of the Newman Idea for me, is like, let's get active and hit the streets doing what Newman wanted to bring to the people and not just something to keep in a sort of niche.
Yeah, I can't remember if this is a Pope Francis thing or if one of the U.S. bishops said this, but I know there's been someone in leadership who's been pressing that as Catholics, we can't be completely about institutional preservation. There has to be a missional aspect to what we do. And it's kind of a tough time in some ways for American Catholicism because of the dip in vocations to religious life and because some sociological changes. Some of our old institutions have become really difficult to maintain and preserve, but there's just a human temptation to cling to, quote unquote, the way that we've always done it. And again, I mean, I would just really praise you guys for having a certain level of like creativity and saying we still want to live out the vocation that Christ has called us to in the Catholic Church, but we realize with the state of higher education that to sound a little cliche, like a new thing is coming into being. Isn't there some kind of cheesy song about singing the church into being?
Well, that's like when Dave and I are driving around to wherever we're going to talk to people, we sing that song the whole way in the car.
That's how I envision you guys. Like Dave's in the passenger seat just like dying from cold temperatures, but you guys are
singing the song to keep
well,
it.
Bo got one of those like traveling acoustics, so like it's like small enough that I can play it on my lap, like with my seatbelt on.
Right. It's highly dangerous, and in the case of a wreck, the airbag is going to shatter that guitar.
Well, the guitar's pink too. It's from Russell Hittinger, so like people when we drive by are kind of like, "What is going on?" But like we are troubadours now for Christ. Yeah. One thing I was going to say though is that I do love, there's a kind of a threefold factor in this. I would never have really gotten the right launch on the Newman Idea had I not spent 2 glorious weeks in Pittsburgh at the National Institute where Bud is.
They were glorious.
And that's where Bud and I really, we really cemented our friendship, but also it just gave me the space you got to have scholarly space to kind of analyze what it is. I mean, this initiative isn't coming out of like, we're not throwing spaghetti on a wall. There's actually a real method to this. In other words, that when you become aware of how in like the dire need that Catholic students have for this, and it actually shocked me when I started to understand like the numbers and like where they were and all these things. But I needed that. I needed the study time. I needed that. It was 2 weeks of like intense concentration, and then everything that came out of it. If I didn't have that, and that's what I guess what I think NINS is a beautiful resource is like it's the retreat. Like we went into retreat and we're able to go out and like do the action. But I would just say that, I think that it's a beautiful service, and I think that's something like you guys are like the American Little More in a certain extent, to a certain extent, and we need that.
Yeah, we're certainly blessed with the space and library resources to enable the more theoretical or the, like you said, intellectual retreat. And we do have various programs for Catholics, especially in the area, to grow in their faith. But Bo, I wish we could build a time machine so you could see Dave in action in Pittsburgh, because I feel like he knows more people in Pittsburgh from his 2 weeks here than I do after 2 years. It was, one of the opening scenes from Beauty and the Beast where Belle's like walking through the town and people were like dropping like loaves of bread in her basket and stuff. That was Dave in the Italian part of Pittsburgh.
Oh my God, I was there every day buying something. I was like, you know what? I really need that like extra loaf of bread that I have 2, but I need 3.
Right.
Just to make a trip. I loved it. I didn't realize I was going to love Pittsburgh as a town so much. But the food, like the gumbo I cooked is still like one of the best gumbos I did because and that was the night when you're like, you need to meet Bo Bonner because you talk a lot. And
that was classic.
and that's really how this whole thing started. So
we can't sort this out on air, Dave, but I have to say that's the night you introduced me to your weird Eucharistic theology. No, I can't.
I think you guys will never just look on the other side of the grave. You guys will see it. Jesus will be like holding my shoulder, being like, guys,
Dave was right.
Dave,
oh wow,
this.
that's now officially entered into the record. The FCC can vouch for that. Yeah. Okay, well, we will not go into that one. There's been so many wasted nights having dorky arguments about that. But just to show you, folks, that there's more to just the surface level, and it is really dumb. It is dorky, so don't worry about it. Not only the thank you for matching us up together for this good work. But I really think we all want to say thank you to St. John Henry Newman, because we think and believe that not only is he alive in heaven and active in the world, but there's so much that he wants us to do because he had such a devotion to Jesus Christ. And, in this season, preparing for the coming of Jesus, there's just a lot to be thankful for. Well, we're up to the end of the show, guys. If you want to know more about the Newman Idea, just go to newmanidea.org, or, of course, get a hold of me, and I'd love to talk to you about it. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts and our families, our city, our state, the world, solar system, galaxy, the whole kit and caboodle. This is The Uncommon Good. We'll be back next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.